the, this session is session 6, and it has to do with the plagues, the 10 plagues, and we're going to be looking at chapters 7 to 11. We want to take us a sort of a flashback as we might want to say. We want to roll back and go to where and how did we get to this point in Exodus chapter 7. We know that the Israelites, God's people, he calls them my people. We know that they are being enslaved in Egypt. So God commissions Moses and Aaron to go to Pharaoh with a distinct message. And that distinct message is, let my people go. So where we are, God in chapter 6 promises that he's going to deliver his people, and he's going to do it in ways through plagues, through pestilence, and all of that. And here we are now in chapter 7. And we want to begin by looking at the first 5 verses. Now, and the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and bring my host, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them. There are certain things I want us to note in this passage, or in this section, as we begin looking at the plague. First of all, there are some issues here. Number one, God says that he is going to make Aaron and Moses like God to Pharaoh. Now, it's important that we realize that he's saying, I'm going to make you like El to Pharaoh, powerful to Pharaoh. But what is God's point here? Notice that because they are representing God, because they are being an emissary, if you wish, on God's behalf, God is going to make them like God. And so what we see, just in terms of an aside, is that the name El, or the title El, if you wish, actually is a generic term. You have false Els, false gods. You have pagan gods. Now here, God is saying to Moses and Aaron that, look, I am going to make you like God, like El. So all of the power and the might that God has is not theirs intrinsically, but he is going to make that. And so as a prophet, as a mouthpiece for God, both Aaron and Moses are called gods. All right, not that they are gods. So I want to make that point. The other thing that I want to make point that you should note in this reading is that God says they are my people. The people of Israel, they are my people. So God is about to or has claimed these people for himself. All right? And God is now going to act on their behalf. There's a message that is being sent to Pharaoh here. And the message to Pharaoh is not just that you must let my people go, but God already knows that Pharaoh is going to be rebellious. God already knows that Pharaoh is going to be stubborn and obstinate. So that is not going to take God by surprise. But notice when we looked at chapter 6 or previous chapters, what we saw is the arrogance and ignorance of Pharaoh, because they go to Pharaoh and Pharaoh's response is, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" Now, here, God is going to say, look, Pharaoh is going to be obstinate. Pharaoh is going to be ignorant of me. But you know what? By my acts of judgment, I am going to inflict, he calls it pestilence, upon the people as a result of Pharaoh's disobedience. And here is the statement that is being repeated as they stand before Pharaoh. God says, "The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. What's the point? They will know that I am sovereign. They will know that I am the only true God. They will know that I am mightier and more powerful than all the gods of Egypt, including Pharaoh. So we want to see the plagues in this context, or in that particular context. What context? That, and I'll make this point over and over again as we go through the plagues, that the design of these plagues was intentional, because each of these plagues, what we're going to see is that God is striking at the very heart of Egyptian mythology. And I call it mythology because God is, in each of these plagues, it is basically an attack on the pagan system of Egypt, and to suggest that I am the true God. I am the only God that is able to deliver and act on your behalf. There is no God like me. So that is one point. Another point that I want us to make. But notice what God keeps saying. I am going to take you out, verse 5, with a outstretched hand. All right, my outstretched arm. And that phrase suggests the power of God. That suggests the might of God, that he is going to actually be redeeming, as he said in chapter 6. He's going to be redeeming, delivering, taking out his people from the land of Egypt. And notice what God calls the land of Egypt. He says it is Pharaoh's land, right? Not that Pharaoh owns any of God's creation, but since Pharaoh wants to be the sovereign and is ruler of Egypt, then we're going to, for convenience sake, call it his land, but it's actually my land, because I am creator, I am deliverer, I am redeemer, I am all powerful, I am God. And Pharaoh is going to know that. How is he going to know that? Through these plagues, God is going to be striking at the very heart of Egyptian religion and Egyptian pagan system. Okay? So now let us now look at the idea of the plagues and see what we have here. In the first place, the idea of the plagues is not It's a fact. Now, this plague that God has inflicted, or the plagues that God has inflicted at Egypt, is attested in the New Testament. So if we go to Acts chapter 7 and verses 35 to 36, here is how Stephen records that event in Acts chapter 7, verse 35 through to 36. And this is what Stephen says. And he said to them, men of Israel, take care what you are about to do with these. I'm sorry, I'm reading verse 5, chapter 7, verse 35 and 36. Verse 35 says, being in verse 33, then the Lord said to him, take off the sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their groanings, and have come down to deliver them. And now I will send you to Egypt. Watch this. This Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge? This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led them out performing wonders and signs in Egypt and at the Red Sea and in the wilderness for 40 years. So the factuality of the plagues in recounting the Jewish history, where Stephen's point is that they have always been rejecting the prophets that have sent to them. He mentions the idea that of the plague and of the deliverance, and that is also in chapter 13 and verse 17 of the book of Acts. Now, one thing I want to point out about these plagues. These plagues were not diseases necessarily. They were not diseases as we consider possibly the bubonic plagues or plagues like this or whatever. They were not plagues. What they were marks, strikes, or blows inflicted by God. Some of it is going to come in terms of diseases like the boils, right? Or physical impact, as in the case of the boils. But we'll see that. So it means marks, it means strikes, blows, and they are considered two things. They're considered mighty signs, that's number one, and they're also considered wonders. And if we read Psalm 105, Psalm 106, we will see that. Now, why is this significant? It is not necessarily disease. It is that God is making a mark, that God is making is striking at the heart of. And what we have here is that they are referred to as mighty acts or signs. Some translations would say they are signs and wonders. Now, those two terms are important. They're significant. Why? Because a sign, in describing miracles and God's miraculous work as a sign, what it shows is that signs here and wherever the word is used, it is meant to point to something. Because important for us to recognize that the sign does not point to itself. A sign never points to itself. The signs point to something else. And in this case, the plagues that were inflicted, they were pointing to the God that Pharaoh did not want to know, but it was also pointing to the Israelites that God is acting in their favor. That's one thing. It is also called a wonder. Now, when when God's miraculous actions are considered a wonder, it is looking at these acts from the vantage point of the recipients. Let me explain what I mean. It is from the outside of the act itself. So people are amazed. How do they react to these signs, whatever the signs are? It is wonder to them. Why? Because it is filled with amazement. So it is looking at the signs from how the people are seeing it, whoever those people are. All right, whether it is the New Testament or whether the wonders are going to be made. Now, as I said, what these signs are doing is they are making statements. They're demonstrating quite consistently the reality and the power of God. So if we look at Exodus chapter 12 and verse number 2, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregations of Israel that. All right. So in other words, I think I'm sorry, not verse 2, verse 12. Here's what it says in Exodus 12 and verse 12. All right. Verse 12 says, For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on, now watch this, and on all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. So as I said, one of the phrases that recurring phrases in the book of Exodus is the statement, I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. I am Jehovah. All right. So the idea is that these, God, in chapter 12 and verse 12, God says, in the case of this, the killing of the firstborn, God says, I'm doing it at the very heart of their gods. All right. Now, not only were they acts, blows, strikes of God, not only were they a blow at the very religious system of the Egyptians, they were also directed at, this is another thing that I wanted to keep in mind. They were also directed at the natural phenomena that the Egyptians claimed to be their gods. All right. So in all of these plagues, whether it is the plague of darkness, whether it is the lice, whether it is the turning the Nile into blood, all of that those were natural phenomenons, natural happenings, natural things in Egyptian history that was at the very center of their religious life. Now, they were directed, as I said, at their religious life. And in these plagues, the God of all creation was being declared. They will know that I am God. All right. When we look at the whole book of Exodus, The plagues we could describe as a sort of a subplot. The greater plot is taking them from out of Egypt and promising them to go into the promised land. All right. This is actually a subplot of that whole event, of all of that purpose in God. And as I said, what was said earlier, when we looked at the structure of the book of Exodus, we see that it is episodic. All right. And most of it is told in narrative form. Now, I want to remind you again that narrative form does not necessarily mean that it is not factual. Narrative form always also means that we can, and when we say it's episodic, it means we can take out particular events as recorded in the book of Exodus. We can look at it by itself and as a whole unit without destroying the general story that Exodus tries to give us. So in the plagues, and when we take the plagues out, chapter 7 to 11, we will see a narrative structure. So there is a conflict, there is a resolution of the conflict, there are characters involved. So and in this case, we say that Exodus, the plagues, in this case, because we look at the plagues rather than the literal exodus out of the land, the plagues, that we can take chapter 7 to 11 out and look at it by itself as one particular event or episode within the great and grander story of the book of Exodus. Now, another thing I want us to know about this, about the plagues, is that it is through these mighty acts of Yahweh, through these mighty acts of Jehovah, of the Lord, that they must know that Jehovah himself, that the power and might of God is going to be demonstrated to Pharaoh. And it is being done for a purpose. Look at chapter 8 and verse 19. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. I might do one of two things. I might, because the finger of God is a very important aspect and a very important issue that I want to look at. I might not look at it in terms of a whole lecture. I won't. I might say something more on it, or maybe I might post something on the LMS for you to look at the finger of God, because this is not the first time, this is not the only time that we're going to hear the term the finger of God. And so God doesn't have fingers, by the way. All right. But the phrase is a demonstration of God's power. For instance, Jesus says, "If I with the finger of God drive out Satan," when he was being accused of being the chief of sinners. We're told that the Ten Commandments was written with the finger of God. So I think it's an important thing for us to look at, that we might look at that some time, or if not, as I said, I'll post something on the elements so that you can have a look at it. Okay, now the plagues, as we look at chapter 7 to 11, the plagues can be grouped into three groups. Group A has to do, now here are the plagues in group A. Group A, there is blood in chapter 7, verse 14 to 28. There is the the frogs in chapter 8, verse 1 to 15. There is lice in chapter 8, verse 16 to 32. And those three constitute the plagues in the first group, or group A, as I'm calling it. Group B, in this group, we have the flies, chapter 8, verse 20 to 32. We have animal diseases in chapter 9, verse 1 to 7. We have the boils in chapter 9, verse 8 to 12. That's the second group, calling that group Group B. When we come to Group C, we have the hail in chapter 9, verse 13 to 35. We have the locusts in chapter 10, verse 1 to 20. We have the darkness in chapter 10, verse 21 to 29. And in each of these categories, the first two were announced to Pharaoh at the palace. So the first two, they were told to Pharaoh in the palace, and they had to do with early morning confrontations. So these were in the palace and they were early in the morning. The second set was initiated after the command to go to Pharaoh. Okay, go to Pharaoh. The third group, in each, how it happened and where it happened, that's unannounced. And in one case, is Pharaoh is coming to them. Now, in Group A, the magic and the confrontation with Moses, in that group, here's what we have with the plagues. The divine act in the first two, that is the blood and all of that, the first two, the act in the first two acknowledged the finger of God. In the last two, those in this group introduces a distinction between Israel and Egypt. So if we look at chapter 6 and verse 23, we have this, verse 23. Aaron took, not chapter 6 and verse 23. All right, because this is about the genealogy. So let me verify that for a while. Nonetheless, in this group is not 6. I'm seeing verse 23 is what my note says of chapter 8. Chapter 8 and verse 23. Thus I will put a division. What the point I'm making is here, and let me go over the point. In the first group, what we have introduced is a distinction between Israel and Egypt, and that's what chapter 8, verse 23 say. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen. So God is going to show that there's a distinction between his people and the people of Egypt. That is what we have in 8:23. In the first series of the 3 plagues, what is also significant, I won't read these verses, I'll just give them to you. In the first 3 plagues, Aaron uses his staff, his rod. That is seen in chapter 7, verse 19, chapter 8 and verse 5, and chapter 16. Now, the 10 plagues were turning the water into blood. Chapter 7, verse 14 to 25, the first of these plagues. Now, what is this plague about? And I'm going to deal with it in a greater detail in a couple of minutes. This destroys or disproves the alleged divinity of the Nile River. When we were looking at the background to the book, one of the things we pointed out, and as we looked at the periods of dynasty, all right, the dynasty periods, the dynasty periods in Egypt, what we saw is that the Nile was an important feature of their life. It was central to their existence. All right, it was essential to their well-being. So that is, we're going to see that played out in this chapter. How important the Nile is. So the idea of the Nile River, the first plague, was a blow against the concept that the Nile had some godly divine power. The second one on the frogs in chapter 8, verse 1 to 5, that was intended to show the absurdity of the reptile worship which had been practiced in Egypt. So the reptile worship, that frog plague, was a strike at that one. The third one, the lice, in chapter 8, verse 16 to 19. I'm going to go back to these in greater detail. It was a blow aimed at the entire idolatrous system that was existent at the time. Now, during this plague, what this plague is trying to do is to attack the priestly system. All right, it was trying to attack the priestly system, and it did. And we're going to see how it does that, or how it did that. Okay, so that is one aspect of the situation with the lights. The fourth plague was a plague of flies in chapter 8, verse 20 to 32. And this was designed to show the absurdity of animal worship. All right? Since flies were not a plague to man and beast, right? So now God is going to be attacking their animal life because they saw their animals as godly, as having divine qualities. The fifth plague, that was, I think the King James called it the murrain, M-U-R-R-A-I-A, M-U-R-R-A-I-N, of beast. That was this against the animals, because, as I said, their view was that these animals were sacred. All right, but they're going to have some effect on their life as well, and we will see that in a couple of minutes. Then we had the boils in chapter 9, 8 to 12. The seventh plague of hail was a scourge on their vegetable idols. And we know one of the things that the Israelites wanted to go back to was the leeks and the garlics of Egypt. They worshipped the peach tree. That I find interesting because where I am now and where the school is, Georgia, Georgia is known as the peach state. All right. So they were enjoying peach as early as then. But they worship the peach tree, the onions and the garlic. They had um, divine elements in their view. The vine and the fig. Now the eighth plague of locusts in chapters 10, 1 to 26, 1 to 29, was a supplement and consummation of the preceding plague. Then there is the plague of the darkness in chapter 10, verse 21 to 29. And this was an attack against the planetary system. They saw the sun, the moon, the stars as being godlike as well. And then the plague of the firstborn. Notice, remember, that Pharaoh was throwing the firstborn male or males into the firstborn males, of course, into the river Nile. Here, God is striking at the firstborn of the Egyptian males, all right, or the Egyptians. So this was again against their gods. All right. Let's now look at some of these plagues in greater detail and what they are all about. Okay. Now, as I said, I've given you an outline of the plagues that we have. And so I am not going to be necessarily reading all of that. But I just want to tell you what the plagues are about. And I think this is what this particular lesson is about. Okay, now the first plague of the water of the Nile turning into blood. What we have as a consequence of that is that the fish that were there, the fish life, that life, the fish in the river died. The life of the fish life. I'm trying to find the word, remembering the word for that is used for fish. Anyway, now here is what happened when the Nile was received the first plague or experienced the first plague. First of all, the river died, but also the river stank. Now, what's the consequence of that? The Egyptians could not drink water. All right. Now, because of what we know the Nile is and how important and central the Nile is to their existence, there was, in this case, what it did, it affected the aridity of Egypt and the pestilence. What does that mean? Because we know that the Nile would overflow its bank, and that is how the land would be irrigated and made fertile. The fact that the Nile is not operating as it should suggests that that the land became arid, A-R-I-D. Okay? The first plague here seemed to make the land arid, barren, if you wish. And the last of that, as a result of the Nile, there was the idea of the pestilence. So what do we have here? The prosperity of Egypt in its very life, because it depended on the river overflowing annually, and all of that now became blood, and it's stinking, and the fishes are dying. God is it. That's the first plague in terms of affecting their livelihood. Now, here is something else that we know about the Nile. Because the fish life died, what the implication is, what that means is that the Nile became low. It is not as flowing as it was. The depth or whatever, it became low. Not only was it low to the point that life could not exist in it, therefore the fish died, it was because of the death in it, the Nile became discolored because it just turned to blood. Now, what's the consequence of that? It would affect their animal life. It would affect their animal life, but in this case, because it will affect their animal life, what we have here is the idea that God is now beginning to strike at the very heart of their livelihood. No, the issue. So what the point I'm trying to make here, and I seem to be going over the point because it makes the argument that the Nile, God is striking not just the God like qualities that they have attributed to the Nile, but God is now impacting their livelihood, their existence. And so I want to invite you to read passages like Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 2, and chapter 19, verse 4 and 5, where Isaiah is making reference to the impact of the Nile. All right. So when we read Isaiah, these Isaiah passages, what we're going to see is that the fish died because of the scarcity of water. The fish died also because of the turbidity of the Nile is overflowing, and that can't happen. So that is one of the issues that we have in the Nile. All right. Now let's look at the second plague. The second plague was infested with frogs, and when we look at Egyptian life, um, they placed a lot of emphasis on the reptile life. So frogs, toads, turtles, serpents, creeping things. They classified those as being God. Some parts of it they were gods, but these reptile life, the frogs and the snake and all of that, one of the things that it does demonstrate, or why the Egyptians saw it that way, they were the gods of fertility. All right, they were the gods of fertility. And the fact that God is striking a blow at not only their livelihood, but their fertility. the god of fertility, shows that God is not just a plague in itself, but as I said before, God is striking at their religious system. All right. So their prosperity is going to be affected in the second plague. Now, when we look at the plague, the second plague, we won't read it. I'll leave you to read that. We're told that when all of the frogs died, that reptile life, they were heaped into piles. And what we're told is that the land stank. All right. Now, here is what is the result of that. This causes now the defilement of the soil. And what the soil was producing was actually poisonous. Because what you're going to have now is dead bodies all about the place. Not human bodies, but the animal, the reptile life. Now, what this is going to do, it's going to raise the prospect, the prospect of diseases. It's going to raise the prospect of sickness. All right. So that's the second plague. Now let us look at the third plague, third and the fourth plagues. The dust of the earth. This is the plague of the lice. The dust of the earth became like lice. Can you imagine that? All right. There was the swarm, the air was swarmed with insects. Now again, this was important to the livelihood, the religious experience of the Egyptian people. Now, the lice were like ticks in the air, dust ticks, and they were common in Egypt. But here is the point of these plagues now. The plague of flies may have been used, might have been unusual swarms of the common housefly. And we know how annoying that can be, but here's something that I want you to point out. This also is a attack on their religious system. I keep saying that. You see, because here's what happens. That the ticks, these insects, would latch on to their bodies. All right? And here is the point. It would affect their worship life. Why? Because they could not give religious devotion. The priest would not, their priest would not accept them. They could not offer worship to their gods when they were infected by lice and insects. So not only did it bring about the diseases, but their religious life was affected because they would not be able to present worship with lice on them, and the priest would not accept that because of what they thought about and how they held these insects in their minds. All right. So now let's go to the fifth plague. And this now is the cattle, the animal life. And it's the murrain, M-U-R-R-A-I-N, and it was a disease that affected the animals. So this disease affected the horses, the donkeys, and the camels, all right, because they were stricken with a disease called murrain. Now, what's this murrain? Murrain. It was a loosely designated term to mean infectious diseases on the lower animals, the horses, the cattle, your donkeys, your camels. All right. So here's what happened: the military might of Egypt is going to be affected. That's number one. And two, the transportation is also going to be affected. So the Egyptians did get a blow with this kind of, with this plague. So the destruction of the cattle brought ruin to thousands. It brought ruin to a lot of the Egyptians, and it put them in distress. One, it is going to affect their mode of transportation, but it is also going to affect their food. Because if these animals are dying and are infected, then there is going to be a scarcity of animal food. But we saw earlier that there would have been a scarcity of vegetable life. So what God is doing with these plagues, he is actually striking at the very life and well-being of the Egyptians. But yet, Pharaoh decides that he's not going to let them go. All right? Now, here's another plague that we have. That is the plague of the boils. So the boils broke out on the Egyptians, and it attacked more, and it was severe. So you have the lice attaching to people, like ticks attaching to the people, and now they're going to be infected with boils. Now, the plague, this plague, Moses realized the plague of boils that broke out, and every one of them attacked. That is, these boils, these lice, or whatever, they attacked everybody. All right. And here is the point too. Pharaoh is not going to be spared. All right. So the whole point here is that God in these plagues, he is attacking their religious life, their God, the life that they depend on in terms of their livelihood, in terms of how they're going to get their food, their vegetable life, their animal life, their mode of transportation. Because God is saying between Exodus 7 and 11, I am doing this because Pharaoh is obstinate. I am making judgment on the people of Egypt because Pharaoh will not let my people go. I am going to show Pharaoh that his universe, whether it is religion, his religious life, whether it is his animal life, whether it is his vegetable life, I am the Lord. These things that you hold up as gods, they are not as powerful as I am. I am the Lord. You will know that I am the Lord. Okay, so now let's look at the seventh plague. The seventh plague was that of rain, hail, lightning, and thunder. Now, if you have never seen a hailstorm, you would not realize how dreadful that can be. Now, what the hail, the lightning, the thunder, this was also a part of their religious life. It was also a part of their emotional life. So again, the way they saw the hail as having this kind of a quality, God is saying, no, I am going to be, I have power over that as well. I am the Lord. I have power, and not just that Pharaoh is weak in comparison to me, but what the plagues were also meant to do was to show the Israelites that God is Yahweh. So it was not only a sign to Egypt, but it was meant to show that God, the God of Israel, their God, whom they worshipped, that he was powerful, that he had might, that he had strength. Okay? Now, here's this eighth plague is the plague of locust. And this plague stirred the religious fears of the people to a greater extent than did the preceding plagues. So we have in this plague awe-inspiring an awe-inspiring nature, because they had to deal with swarms of locusts for months. Now, there is something here that you need to see. The locust is not that's going to invade the land. All right, remember, the animals are dying, the animals are infected, vegetable life is affected, but no, here it is. The locust would utterly destroy whatever the lice could not destroy. And there's a I think it's in the book of Joel, where the locust came in stages and just ravaged all of the vegetable, all of the trees. And this is what would have happened in Egypt. So here's what we have. The Nile is drying up. The Nile is low. It's not overflowing its banks as it was. The land is arid. Vegetable life is destroyed. The animal life is being destroyed. But now the locusts are coming, as it were, to finish the job. So and they were coming for weeks in a succession of swarms. They would swarm like a plane, zoom, that kind of thing, and they would destroy everything that the other plagues didn't manage to destroy. So what we have here is that the locust would leave utter destruction and utter desolation. Now, this is going to impact and does impact on the livelihood, the existence of the Hebrews, of the Egyptians. This, the first plague, as it were, was the Nile drying up, was a prediction that frightened the Egyptians because of the way they held their gods. But now this is even more than they can bear. All right. Now let's look at the ninth plague. The ninth plague is a plague of darkness. Plague of darkness. And what again Egypt looked forward to was the sun god. The sun god. And when the darkness came in the ninth plague, when the darkness came in the ninth plague, what we have here is that God is getting at the heart of their existence again. Their religious life. The sun God is also here now, going to be have his day. And God is going to show that the sun God cannot defeat him. Good. So that's up to the ninth plague. Now the 10th plague is the plague of the firstborn. All right. And what we have here is the killing of the males, of the children, the firstborn of Egypt. And this is going to be what is going to allow Pharaoh to relent. But I want you to notice something here, is that as going back to the sun god, what God is dismantling in their mind is their planetary system, how they held that up as having divine qualities. Now, each time Moses would go to God, go to Pharaoh, let my people go. No, God would send a plague. But now what we have here is Moses saying, okay, no, I've had enough. I've had enough. They can go. That occurred after the 10th plague, when Pharaoh saw that, look here, I'm helpless against the God of Israel. My people are being destroyed, all of the land, the religious, the vegetable, the animal, all of that. God is suggesting to them that, look here, the in Moses's eye, in Pharaoh's eye, it is, it's now time to let the people of God go. Let my people go. So that is the issue of the plagues. And as I said, what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to give you put something on the LMS that has to do with the plagues, and how, in fact, God is getting at the very heart and message to Pharaoh that, look here, you are not as powerful as you are. I am the Lord, and you will know that I am the Lord. So that's the purpose of the plagues. All right. And after that, the people are going to be, Pharaoh is going to let the people go. And it's about time, as we said that. So what is it that we learn from the plagues? All right. There are a couple of things. First of all, God is sovereign. God is acting. One, God is sovereign, and he rules over all. Secondly, God is acting on behalf of his people in a way that the enemies cannot defeat. So even though in some of the plagues and some of the miracles, some of the things that the Egyptians could do, they could not withstand. They could not replicate. They could not duplicate. They could not mimic these plagues. All right. So, with at the end of the plagues, what we're going to get into, we're going to get into the Passover. And we're going to see what was destruction for the Israelite, for the Egyptians in terms of their firstborn being killed. And what we're going to see in the Passover next week is how God is now going to be using the Passover as a type of our redemption. And we're going to look at the Passover in that light. All right. So this is what I want to say about the plagues in this class. What I want you to do is to go and to read chapter 7 through to chapter 11. Make your notes for the second class notes. All right. And when you're outlining, all that you need to do is to say, the first plague, the river Nile turns to blood, and to say what that plague was meant to accomplish. Okay, so we will see you in class next week, Thursday, as we look at the Passover. Okay.